Have you ever felt like you had to be the nice girl, the one who never says no, always says yes, and always prioritizes everybody above herself? Now, don't get me wrong, I think being kind and accommodating is a very, very important part of being a good person. But when being nice becomes a chore rather than a choice, that is when the problems start. Because people pleasing isn't just about being polite, it's about shrinking yourself to make other people feel more comfortable. So today we are going to be breaking down nice girl culture, why it's keeping you stuck, and how you can set boundaries without feeling guilty. Because being kind and being a doormat are not the same thing. Hey, it's Joelle. Welcome back to my channel. If you're interested in lifestyle and personal growth advice that is both realistic and relatable, then keep on watching. Today we're going to be speaking about something that's very near and dear to my heart, the topic of setting boundaries. I speak about this a lot in all of my videos. Today I wanted to go a little bit more in depth as to what that actually looks like, as well as why so many of us struggle with setting boundaries. In my opinion, there is one key culprit as to why we struggle to set boundaries, and that is good girl syndrome. So if you're not familiar with the term, good girl syndrome is essentially this idea of being nice, kind, accommodating, docile to a fault. It is typically something experienced by women, by girls, because society pushes a lot of ideas about women being submissive, women being nurturing, endearing, loving, and all those sorts of things. Oftentimes it ends up being to our own detriment. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's really, really admirable and a really, really desirable thing to be a kind and loving person. But there is always a need for boundaries and self-respect. If you feel like you maybe struggle with some of these things, let's have a talk about what it looks like to suffer from good girl syndrome. So the first symptom of good girl syndrome is that you do not know how to say no. There are so many of us who, rather than saying no, will bend over backwards in order to be agreeable to other people. And that is a very, very clear sign that you are struggling with setting boundaries. You are struggling with the idea of being a nice girl, and the goal of being a nice girl is absolutely wrecking your ability to have self-respect and prioritize and preserve yourself. Sign number two is that you never prioritize yourself. If you find that you are always putting other people's needs first, you are never considering your own health, your own well-being, your own priorities, then it is a very clear sign that you have an issue with accepting and acknowledging your own self-worth, and instead you are prioritizing everybody above yourself. Sign number three is that you are preoccupied with other people's opinions. Now, in the interest of not being confrontational and of not upsetting anybody or being disagreeable, it's very easy to kind of get in our heads and overthink about what other people feel and think about us, the way we present ourselves, what we say, what we think, how we act, and what we believe in. And I think it's very important to be conscious and, accountable and self-aware of who you are and what you're doing and, the consequences and implications of the things you do and say. However, if you are actually preoccupied and you sit down before you make any minor decision and you are literally ruminating on what other people may or may not say, that is a sign that you are suffering from good girl syndrome. Final symptom of good girl syndrome, and probably the reason why you're here, is because you struggle with setting boundaries. Boundary setting is a very, very important element and aspect of personal growth. Now, if you struggle with setting boundaries, the good news is what you can do to help rectify that. But before we get into that, I think it is really, really important that we trace the root of the issue and try and work out where it is that our issues with boundary setting are coming from. AKA, why are you a pushover? So I've compiled a list of some of the common reasons why people tend to have pushover, doormat tendencies. If any of these sound like you or something that you resonate with, give me a thumbs up in the comments. So let's talk about reasons why you struggle with setting boundaries. Reason number one is that you have a deep-rooted fear of rejection. I feel like everybody honestly has some level of abandonment or attachment wound just from living and existing in this world. But sometimes it can manifest itself in a really, really nasty way. We become so frightened of people not liking us or people leaving us that instead of us sticking to our guns, instead of us standing in our truth, we are willing to bend and acquiesce and compromise on things that are truly important to us. Reason number two, you have anxiety. There is something very, very specific about relationship anxiety, and this isn't just for romantic relationships, it also applies to platonic and familial relationships as well. Constantly ruminating on how things are going, on your friendships, on your family links. Do people care about me? Am I fun? Am I good enough? Are these people going to leave? Because you're essentially living in a fear cycle about the state of your own relationships with other people, it can make you very, very risk averse. What can happen is that you just stop saying things. You stop expressing your opinions because you're afraid that it will lead to the breakdown that you predicted in your head. The final and probably one of the biggest reasons why people struggle with setting boundaries is because of societal and most specifically cultural norms. Now, I think broader society has a lot to do with why so many women and girls struggle with setting boundaries and struggle with people pleasing. It is very, very difficult to feel like you can assert yourself and be dominant in this day and age. Even post-feminism is very, very difficult sometimes to break free of like deep-rooted, deeply ingrained societal norms about how women should behave and how they should conduct themselves. There is so much value placed on a woman being agreeable for other people, and I feel like this combination of broader societal as well as specific cultural norms like can really perpetuate this inability to set and stick to boundaries. And let me give you a key example of this. This is especially to my girls and women of color. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You've gone to school, you came back in the evening, there are 6 new pairs of shoes, some uncle you did not know is now living in your bedroom and you have to sleep in your sibling's room. That isn't because they had nowhere else to go. It's because your mum probably can't set boundaries either, because it is something that so many ethnic minority cultures perpetuate. A lot of our mothers, a lot of our grandmothers, a lot of our aunties overstretch, and we are taking on the same example that we see. And I'm not blaming them for it. It's a broader cultural issue that needs to be rectified. But I don't think we need to fall into the same traps. So now we've spoken about people pleasing, good girl syndrome, how to recognize it and where it comes from. Let me give you an 8-step guide to setting effective boundaries. Number 1 is to reassess your values and where they come from. As I mentioned previously, I think that there is a lot to do with society, specific cultural norms, as well as potential religious or faith-based norms that may be contributing to the way that we feel we need to show up. And it's not to say that I think you should abandon your traditions or your cultural traditions. My religion and my culture are very, very important to me. But I think it is about really getting to grips with your value systems and understanding what those things truly are and what they truly mean. So let me give you an example. In Christianity, one of the very key commandments that we are given is to be loving. For example, you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. Old me, people pleasing Joelle, would always take that first part. You should love thy neighbor. Why I had ceased to recognize was the second part, as thyself. In order for you to love your neighbor effectively, you have to have a foundational love of yourself. This realization only stemmed from me reassessing my value systems and kind of where they came from. And I think it's something that all of us should really be attempting to do as the first step in this process. Step number 2 is to recognize your value. You have inherent value just because. You being here is enough to warrant you being important and is enough to warrant you being valued. If you know you have value inherently, not based on anything you do, not based on anything you say, you will become a lot more confident and a lot more strong in showing up authentically within yourself and having boundaries, because you will realize that your self-worth doesn't come from people agreeing with you. Step number 3, start saying no and stop feeling guilty. How many times have you been invited out to an event and you really, really didn't want to go, but because you didn't want to sound rude and because you didn't want to sound unreasonable, you're like, okay, I'll go. Newsflash, no is good enough. If somebody asks you out or somebody, asks you to do something or suggests you do something and you don't want to do it, you are very much within your right to just say no and leave it there. I'm not explaining myself to you. I'm not justifying my decision to you. I know the reason why I've made this decision and I'm standing in it, and therefore you have to respect it. Step number 4 is to let people think what they want. Everybody wants to be liked, but at the expense of your own sense of self-respect. Anybody who, agrees with you more when you are shrinking yourself, that person isn't for you. Get to grips with the idea that people are going to think what they're going to think. No matter what you do, no matter who you try to please, there will always be someone who disagrees with you. It's best to get comfortable with the fact that people are going to perceive you and they may not like what they see. That's fine. Step number 5 is to take yourself seriously, because if you don't take yourself seriously, no one else is going to either. If you don't take yourself seriously, why should I? Step number 6 is to reevaluate your relationships. Pay attention to who listens to you. Something you will notice is that the people who do not actually respect you, despite how much you try and appeal to them, they won't listen to anything you say. When you talk and open your mouth, they don't want to hear it. Either they shut you off, they interrupt you, and that should be a telltale sign that that person is not for you. Even if I disagree with somebody, I'll listen to you. Not because I'm waiting to disagree with you, but because I want to understand where you're coming from, because I think people deserve the respect. If someone were to listen to you speak, why on earth would you be seeking their approval? Tip number 8, and my final tip, is to start small. Set one boundary a week. Make one decision a week and stick through it. I'm going to make sure that I eat breakfast every single morning. Or I'm going to make sure I drink 2 liters of water every day. make sure that whatever it is that you've decided you're going to do for this week, you stick to it. And this is a really, really good exercise, I think, because it doesn't rely on anybody else's actions. I think it's a really good way of practicing the idea of thinking of a boundary, setting the boundary, and also respecting it for your own self. So yeah, as I've been reiterating throughout this video, I think boundary setting is very, very important for any aspect of personal growth, whether it is goal setting, whether it is becoming your best self, whether it is overcoming laziness. But I've been talking for ages, and I really want to know what you think. So let me know down in the comments. Like this video if you like this video, and I will see you again next week. Bye.